All right, we are live. You there? Mike, you there?
I'm here. What's going on,
Awesome.
Pat? How are you?
Hey, great. Great to have you on Sales and Cigars. So happy to have you.
Happy to be here, man. Happy to take the time. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we keep in touch pretty decently, right? We worked together probably 10, 15 years ago, but we keep in touch pretty frequently.
We do. Yeah, I think it's an occasional acquaintance for sure. Yeah, I mean, we touch base at least once a month for sure. Every couple weeks.
How you been, man? How are things?
I've been good. You know, this market's been a bit crazy. You know, ups and downs this year, especially in the telematics, like GPS type stuff. I think technology as a whole has been a little rocky this year, but overall, I mean, I can't complain. Especially on a personal, everything's going great, dude. So,
that's
12-year anniversary today. 12 years. So, woo!
And I think I had told you earlier, but we're coming up on 21 years,
which is amazing. So, I mean, in 2024, I mean, that's if you see someone that's been married for over 10 years, you're like, wow, that's awesome. Love hearing that.
Well,
congratulations.
When we first got married, we said, we're going to give it a solid 21 years, see how it plays out, and we're going to reevaluate after 21 years. So, in September, we're going to have a big talk about it. No, I'm totally kidding. But welcome to Sales and Cigars, Mike. Welcome everybody who's listening. I know the thousands of people out there that are tuning in right now, taking time away from the Olympic opening ceremony. We really fight with them for ratings during this time, during the day, and during this time of year. And so the Olympics is losing. We are winning. The Sales and Cigars is winning out the Olympics right now. So, and I know, JM, that you have that on in the background, the Olympic opening ceremony, and if you even knew it was happening. So, do you have that on in the background, JM?
I was told millions, so you said thousands. I thought I was told millions to be on. We're gonna have to cut this off now. I don't do anything less than at least 1 million streams. But no, I'm just teasing. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Olympics, quite honestly. I actually grew up in Diamond Bar, and I knew, if you know Alex Morgan, she's a soccer star. She's a legend, right? I mean, for the Women's USA soccer team. And I was, sort of friends, acquaintances with her big sister growing up in Diamond Bar. So I would always root for the women's, USA team during the Olympics because, they'd actually have a chance of winning, right? So that was always fun to watch. But other than that, I don't know, man. I can't get into it. Maybe it's the time differences, especially when it's like in Paris or, wherever. So I'll use that as my excuse.
I'm actually really excited about the skateboarding coming into the Olympics. I love watching the skateboarding. I was a big skater when I was a kid back in the 80s. I loved the Bones Brigade. I loved all of that. So it's been a long time coming that skateboarding has actually got some recognition. Now, with skateboarding, there is a lot of infighting on whether skateboarding actually is a sport or an art. So I know there's a lot of purists out there that don't agree with skateboarding being in the Olympics. But personally, for me, I love watching skateboarding anywhere, anytime, any place. Let's go. I love it.
You're welcome, by the way. I know the people on the stream don't realize that before this call, you were talking a lot of. I won't use any bad words on this in case my kids are listening. You're some choice words for Southern California, I think, is what you said. But you're welcome. Skateboarding had essentially being the foundation of all the skateboarding and the Bones Brigade being out here in like Venice and anyway, you're welcome. I'll just say that. Well, what kind of skateboard did you have, by the way? I had a Volterra, if you remember that. Remember Volterra?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I skated Elva, actually. I was kind of they're from California as well.
Shocker. Like everything Elva, amazing. Yeah.
Bill Danforth, all those guys, they skated the pools. And
Bones Brigade. Yeah, you had Tony Hawk was part of that, but who is the guy that made all the films? Like the dog, he was a skater, but he also became like a big producer.
The Dogtown guy, or
the Dogtown. Yeah, I forget what his name was. Jeez.
Steve Peralta. Steve Peralta.
Peralta, that's the guy. Yep.
Yeah,
that's the guy. Yeah, he became.
Rating has had over the years, unbelievable. And I'm 48 years old and I still skate. Mike, what do you think about that?
I think it's an unwise move. I think the next cigars and sales we're going to be talking, you'll be probably talking from your rehabilitation bed, most likely. So I did jujitsu at the beginning of this year. My kids are all in jujitsu, and I did jujitsu back in my 20s for a couple years. And so my kids got back into it, so I got the bug. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get back in jiu-jitsu. This is such a great way to, burn calories and stuff. And I did it I started in January, like 3 months later, and I had a conversation. I had lunch with one of my guys, my buddies, John Choi. And he'll love hearing this. And he goes, what are you doing? He goes, you're 46, dude. He goes, you have no business doing jiu-jitsu. And I was like, no, it's great. It's great. I'm flexible. It's doing flexibility. He's like, no. He's like, mark my words, the next time we have lunch again, you're going to be hurt. Like, you're going to tear your elbow. He must have jinxed me because I literally tore my shoulder muscle. I tore my leg. I had a hernia. It was brutal. The kids I was rolling with, and by the way, they are kids. They were like 21, 22. Oh. And they're just so much more flexible. I mean, the only thing I have on them was weight. I weighed more, so I could just lay on top of them. That's about it. So.
Were you a wrestler?
I was not, but the majority of those guys in jiu-jitsu are wrestlers, and I was telling my son that. It's like, hey, listen, the guys that you see in here that are really good, and the girls, by the way, they have like a wrestling background. Some of the guys were like NCAA wrestlers, and they're just amazing. So, I mean, jiu-jitsu essentially, if you look at its core, is sort of like dirty wrestling, right? I mean, it's wrestling with a little bit of striking and some, arm breaking, so it's at its core.
A lot of skill and technique, for sure. I did jiu-jitsu for about 5 years in the early 2000s, and I feel I don't know what's going on behind me, but who knows. But
it's a run on cigars, man. It's a popular place.
Yeah, it is. And welcome everybody again. We're at Smokies in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. We are at Square Lake Woodward. This is Metro Detroit's prime place. Best humidor in Metro Detroit, hands down. Best prices, best selection. And, we'll get into the jiu-jitsu maybe a little bit more in a minute here, but I just want to kind of, introduce everyone to Smokies and say hi to Mike today. You see his name is JM on the screen. I call him Mike. If you're a good friend of his, you can call him Mike too. Get to know him, right?
That's right.
The wise man once said, get to know me. But I'm going to stick with my theme today, JM, smoking back-to-back. Yes, back-to-back. This is a Davidoff cigar back-to-back. These are a nice full-bodied dark cigar. They do make a Connecticut wrapper with a little lighter flavor to it, a little lighter puff to it. But I do want to talk about a couple other cigars here today. It was really between the Plasencia. This is a machine-rolled cigar, the Plasencia. You've heard of these, James? Plasencia?
I have. Now, can you explain the difference between machine-rolled and hand-rolled, and why do you prefer? Well, you don't prefer a machine roll, do you, over hand roll?
Both. I like them both. Some machines are better than others. Obviously, just same with hand rolled. Hand rolled are literally hand rolled. Is my computer frozen here? Hold on 1 second.
A little bit, yeah. I think you have a little bit of a lag, but you're good.
Okay. Well, you can hear my audio, correct?
I can hear you just fine, buddy. Yep.
So hand rolled are literally hand roll. Like if you've ever been to a wedding or something as a cigar roller, or someone come on site and roll a cigar, they'll have the tobacco, the wrapper, the filling, and they'll roll the cigar right there. These are hand rolled cigars right here. These are the Tabernacle Red Churchill. A really great cigar. This is probably about an hour 20 minutes. It's a really great cigar. Smokes a little longer, smokes pretty heavy. But I like that heavier flavor taste. I like a lot of smoke coming out, and I like a big puff. That's just my style. I don't, love it or hate it. I love it. The Tabernacle is an amazing foundation cigar, and it's got amazing band artwork. I don't know if you can see that, but we'll zoom in on the edit. But these are amazing cigars. So today we're looking at the Plasencia, and this is a Connecticut wrapper. This is the Almo de Campo. And then, but today I'm going to stick with the Nicaragua. And this is a Davidoff brand called Back to Back. It's a shorter cigar, but it smokes pretty long. It gets heavier as it shortens, and it's just got a great toke to it. Really great cigar. And I understand,
awesome.
Well, this is our first broadcast where we're actually remote.
Right.
first off. So thank you. JM is visiting us from where exactly are you visiting us from today?
So we got thrown a little bit of a thrown for a little bit of a loop. I was supposed to be at a cigar lounge down in Lake Forest, which is right outside. It's right inside of Orange County, but they have a strict law at this place around any kind of web streaming or something. So I had to make a quick audible, and so went to my local coffee shop here in Corona, California, called Crave, which is a fantastic place. A little bit noisy right now. It's kind of the peak of the day on Friday, but I did on the way, because I couldn't get to a humidor in Lake Forest. I stopped by my local gas station and picked up the finest Dutch Master cigar that you've ever seen. Look at this. Look at that. Look at that.
That is true commitment. Thank you
for the
that.
worst thing you've ever seen?
See,
it's not horrible though. It's not horrible. I mean, if you're in a pinch, it'll work.
Well, that's why I was a little surprised when we jumped on the call prior to going live, is I was thinking you picked that up at that cigar.
Oh God, no.
And I was like, why would he pick that? So now it makes more sense. So
I don't know if they'd even carry something like that. No, I'm a novice in comparison to you and your brother Terry, which I'm sure we'll talk more about him later on. When it comes to cigars, I used to be very heavy into cigar smoking, probably in my early 30s, and I can't do as much anymore. I just, for some reason, I get real stuffed up. But I mean, it's much more quality over quantity now. So if I can, I really enjoy grabbing like a Dominican Monte Cristo are fantastic. Obviously, the Cuban ones are a little bit harder to get.
Yeah,
those are great. I like a real mild cigar too. Once in a while, grabbing on the golf course. My buddy Joe he's gotten big into cigars now, and he's always bringing some really nice stuff to the course. So, if when the moonshine's right, I'll grab one. So
nice, and along with some moonshine, probably.
Have you ever drank like straight moonshine?
I have.
That stuff is. At one time, never again. That stuff's like turpentine. That basically is turpentine.
I probably have a dozen times.
Have you?
Yeah. We were from the sticks way up north in northern Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
But we always I had a friend whose parents always went to the Indy 500.
Yeah.
And they have moonshiners show up to Indy in droves and sell moonshine in the parking lot. And they would always come back with like 10 jars of moonshine.
Yeah.
And then we would just take half of them. We're high school, right?
Yeah. It's probably an acquired taste, I'm guessing. So yeah, it's
no,
I'm sure there's
not acquired taste for that.
No, just gasoline. If you're acquired taste for gasoline, same stuff.
You can acquire a taste for the feeling of it.
I think that's called something different, but
couple shots of that, man. All right, there we go.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I don't drink. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's do. You cannot light up, but you're in a.
I cannot. I'm happy to watch you partake, please. I'm interested to know about it too. Yes. Yeah, now let me ask you this: you have hold on a second, from a purist's point of view, right? You're using a butane lighter, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, isn't that like sacrilege in the cigar community? Aren't you supposed to use like a nice piece of tinder kindling to light your cigar? No?
Nah, if you're a true purist, but if you look, see how far away I'm holding the lighter?
So you're not getting any of the...
Not only that, is this tip that you don't see up here is the hottest point of the light.
Got it.
So you're actually just getting the heat after the fumes of the butane is burned off.
Got it. See, so we're learning stuff as we go. It's amazing. It's good stuff. It should just be cigars and cigars. We don't even talk about sales. We just go for it.
Yeah. And so you get a nice. If I just go like this and suck right in, right, even with a match, I'm getting it right down the middle of the cigar, and it's pulling down straight down the middle, and I'm going to have a really uneven burn from that point forward. So I want to make sure that the entire tip is the same temperature and heat, and then I want to start puffing on that. I could probably
I'm learning so much right now, Pat. You just keep talking.
And, I could have guys, this stuff goes deep. I'm a novice as far as cigars go. I don't claim to be an expert, but I love the culture and I love to smoke them. So that's why I brought that into the mix on the podcast, and it's a great environment. We have people who show up for the podcast live.
Yeah, I've learned in my years that you can sort of be passionate about anything. I mean, there's people you're passionate about cigars. You're passionate about wine. It's you're passionate about
running,
but just
golf.
about anything. Fantasy football, dude. I mean, like anything. Like you can. What's great about 2024? What's great about I think the technological revolution we've had in the last probably 20 years is the information is just so readily available. You know what I mean? Like it's just. I was talking to and this is fun. I'll date myself here. I took my kids to a comic book like expo called Frankensons out here in Southern California. It's only open 2 days a week, but essentially it's just all things comic book and whatever. And I have I went to my mom's old house. She lives close by, and I remember I had this huge box of like old comic books. My when I was growing up, and I'm like, I wonder if any of these are worth anything. And what's funny is back when I was a kid, you had these things. I think it was called the Overstreet publication. You had to like look in this book of like what your comic books were worth, And it's like now they have these tools where I downloaded something on my phone and I can just point it at my comic book. It'll take a picture of it and tell me exactly if it's valuable or not. I mean, again, they've made it so easy to sort of be, for lack of a better word, like an aficionado with anything, right? I mean, you can sort of just become an expert with the information you can get pretty easily.
I've been getting in the habit of using these generative AI just instead of searches. Yeah. So you could say, is this comic book at this level or at this quality worth anything?
Right.
And it'll scour the entire internet and come up with a really good answer that is not too hyperbolic. That is a pretty reasonable answer for what you're looking for.
It's becoming, just getting into the AI thing. It's getting. People say, "Oh, it's scary." It's, I guess, at some level, you could look at it as being scary. And I think the difference is the people who, I don't think it's scary at all. I think it's fantastic. I think it's amazing. I think it's just another tool in the toolbox. I mean, I'm sure you could have said the same thing about a laptop computer back in the early '90s, right? Oh, this is scary. How much? Exactly. So I think the people who don't use it, that is kind of scary because if you're you're competing against somebody in our industry in sales, and they're not integrating AI, into like their pitch or whatever it is or their messaging. Then you're probably going to lose out to that person who is utilizing AI to its fullest capability, right? So it's important.
Yeah, I have some good insights on that a little bit later. But why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction to yourself, Mike, and let us know where you're from, what you're doing, who you are, where you've been, and where you're going, and then we'll get into some good conversations about your life, your career, your passion, your sales, your business. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I started a long time ago. I've been in sales for almost 20 years, a little bit over 20 years, I guess. Started out in the wireless industry. So people remember a company called Pacific Bell, which turned into Singular, which is now AT&T. Pac Bell, and it was part of like, the conglomerate, San Francisco, the conglomerates of all the bells, right? You had Southwestern Bell and all these different SBC and stuff like that. So now it's all just AT&T. But I got started there, after my first sales career really was, started out selling shoes when I was, 15, 16 years old, went to Circuit City, worked there for about 3 years. And while at Circuit City, I got really heavy into the wireless, into the cell phones at that time, because you could make so much money. I mean, you could just make ridiculous amounts of money as a 19-year-old selling cell phones, right? And so I did such a good job at that. I got recommended for, sort of go interview with one of the carriers, which at the time was Pac Bell Mobile Services. Got that job, and I was there for about 7 years. And that's sort of where it was my first career, right? Quote unquote career. When you're like 19, 20 years old, you actually get into being a full-time job. And I was an account executive there. And sort of what we did was, sold for a couple of years, but then went to be an account executive. And that was sort of supporting our agent partners. That being like the third parties. They weren't like, actual company-owned stores, but they were owned by third-party individuals, and we'd take care of their training, and we'd help them with their marketing. And what was cool about that job, it was, I was 21 years old telling these guys who had multi-millions of dollars invested in this business, like where a good location to put their next store would be. Here I am 21 years old, and I'm telling this guy who's, in his late 40s, has been owned several different businesses successfully. And I'm saying like, no, you don't want to put your business here. You want to put it there. And they're listening to you as a 21-year-old, because we were pretty smart about like, knowing, what the demographics looked like, what it took for success in that area. So that was kind of a cool intro to sort of, business, I guess. You know, it was a great way for me to sort of get into that later on, sort of technology in its infancy with
Yeah,
wireless,
and it
because
was all
wireless,
research based. All of
right?
that. There was no algorithm to show what the best location is. So it took a lot of data over many years to have a good understanding of that. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were taking at that time. You're thinking like this is like 2000, like the year 2000, 2001. We were taking data from like pager stores, dude. Because I mean, we didn't have enough cell phone locations at that time. We had, I mean, plenty of mixed. But anyway, I can talk for an hour about this. But it was a good at 21 years old. It was a good like welcome to the big leagues type of movement to be able to get in the same room with these people. I mean, we were meeting with city council members about like where to place cell sites. I mean, all this kind of. It was really, again, I can't say this enough. As a 21-year-old, you grew up very, very fast, and the majority of the people I was working with were not as young as I was. So that was kind of cool. And I again worked there for 7 years. Got into the telematics industry in about 2008, and
How'd you
again, it
make
was
that transition? And also, can you define telematics to the audience? You don't know how many times I just use that word, and people are like, "What's telematics?"
Yeah, it's sort of a made-up word, isn't it? I think we
Yeah.
probably made it up. Probably in somewhere in the early
Yeah.
2010s. Yeah, so I'd been in wireless with Pacific Bell, then Singular, then AT&T, and then a company called Helio, which was a real startup that lasted a few years. And so when I was interviewing, when I was making the transition from Helio to whatever the new company was going to be, this company called Navman came along and was looking for someone to help manage their dealer channel, which is something very similar to what I did at AT&T, managing the wireless dealer channel. So telematics, for lack of a better word, it's GPS fleet management, right? So if you have a fleet of vehicles, you are looking for a way to manage those vehicles using, essentially black box modems that go inside the vehicle. So think about like, the black box recorders that go in airplanes, right? Very similar, but they go inside the vehicle. They record all the events that happen with that vehicle, including diagnostics, harsh driving behaviors. And now, adding on to that, right? There's sensors, there's cameras, AI-powered cameras that go in the vehicles that'll, essentially use that AI algorithm to tell you with a pretty sophisticated level of certainty whether your driver is going to get in an accident in the next 12 months, right? I mean, they've gone that far. They can tell you when your driver's not wearing a seatbelt, if he's smoking, if he's dozing off before so this is all sort of under the umbrella of telematics, what we refer to as vehicle telematics. So another fancy way of just saying like, technological fleet management, right? And so got into that back in 2008, and I've been doing that ever since. This is where you and I met. I went to go from Navman to then Teletrack, running the inside sales team at Teletrack for North America. I mean, I was managing at one time, I think we had like 22 inside salespeople. And you were an outside sales guy, so a little bit different. Did that for about 10 years and left that to become a VP of a company who also did telematics called CarTrack out of South Africa, a multi-billion-dollar company that didn't have any sort of presence in North America and was looking for someone to come in. And I always refer to this as like my dream and a nightmare scenario, right? So I got the sort of the keys of the castle to restart the North American sales team for this massive conglomerate in our space. And we did it for like 6 months. And after 6 months, we got rug pulled. We lost funding. There was a bunch of stuff going on with the ELD. ELD, for those of you on the call, is electronic logging device. So it's essentially your vehicles starting in 2000, I think it was 19 is when the mandate finally hit. You had to have electronic logging devices in your vehicles to be DOT compliant. And there was like a level at that time, there was a level of DOT compliance of all these, this thick binder of regulations you had to have within your system. Well, at that time, this company that I was working for was not DOT compliant. They were only about 70% compliant, which means that it was going to take a lot of money to bring us equal with the competitors that we were going to be going up against day to day. And they just didn't want to spend that. So I got rug pulled. And that's tough. That was really tough. I mean, we built out a business. We built out the sales model. Again, I'm, in my, early 30s, and I'm essentially building out a multi-million-dollar business and relocating the office and hiring a support staff. And, we were literally putting together like the Salesforce admin stuff. So it was a great learning experience. I tell people to this day, it was like I got paid to learn how to, relaunch a market, which was kind of cool. At the same time, I wish it would have lasted a little bit longer. And I stayed right along that, went to work for a company based in Israel called Green Road, which does similar type stuff, but more in the behavioral modification type stuff. Was the VP of sales for North America there for the enterprise, going after huge companies like Chevron and Shell. Schlumberger was one of our biggest customers. Breakthrough Beverage, Ovintiv. I mean, some massive deals. And that was a fun, because that not only was that being a head of sales and managing people in North America, but I actually had to carry it back. Like I actually had a quota to hold. So that was, so the first time in many years I actually had to go out there and lead the sales myself. And so that was different. And then did that for a couple of years. Then went back to pure leadership with a company called Keep Truckin', which then turned into Motive. One of those in our industry. There's only a few what we call unicorns, right? $1 billion valuation type companies. Motive, Samsara, few, just to name a few. So when I had the opportunity to go and lead a team over there, I jumped because it was, again, one of sort of like the pillars of our industry at that time. Was great for 3 years.
I was actually hired at Motive and turned it down.
You were. Yeah, you were highly recommended by me, as I recall. Yeah, absolutely. I wish we would have had you. I'm sure the company would have been saved had you been there. So, and look,
I was getting at it.
Exactly. So just a few months ago, Motive had a reduction. And this is sort of, we could probably talk about this too, as far as like technology and sales, right? So this is something that is probably not the best thing about the industry that we work in, being that technology and in sales, and more specifically telematics, is there's a lot of, ups and downs, a lot of peaks and valleys. And so specifically this one, they had a reduction for us. I had just been promoted a year ago to this day, like July 1st, I was promoted to senior director of sales. And 6 months later, they did a reduction. They flattened all the segments, and myself and a couple other really talented people who had been there a long time were unfortunately released. So I'm sort of just, again, I can't complain too much. I mean, it's we live a good life. We have, roof over our heads, so not complaining too hard. But just sort of being very picky about where my next landing spot is, which is kind of a fun thing. And that's another thing we can talk about, is sort of the market out there, the job market out there is so crazy right now. I mean, I'm sort of toying with the idea of going back and being an individual contributor versus being a leader again. Because again, it's sort of, there's something to be said about sort of, being in charge of your own pipeline, not having to worry about, a team of individuals. But at the same time, leadership is sort of my passion and what I love to do. So I don't think I'd be too disappointed doing either one of those jobs at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And, we're always hiring.
It's good to know.
Thank you. You'd be a great culture fit.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You align well with our values. I can tell you that right now.
Are we sure about that? We put that up. Is this recorded?
Oh, we know for sure. I am 100% confident that you align with our values here.
Nice.
No, but what a great story. I love that. I started selling shoes and became, VP in North America. Like that,
yeah.
That is fucking killer.
Thanks, man.
It is. And
we say it out loud, it sounds better. Yeah.
Talk about, if you would, the transition and mindset going from an individual contributor into leadership. Because I think a lot of times, and this has been a hot topic lately in my world, where we're talking with a lot of companies through this process, where they're raising AEs up to the next level of leadership out of, so they, for instance, they have a superstar sales guy who's just blowing the water out of, everyone and killing it for the last 3 years. And essentially what they want to do is bring him up into leadership, right? Which sounds like a great idea, right? But now we see this transition, and a lot of these guys don't make the transition. And then they end up going, and this has nothing to do with your situation, right? Like this, they get, you are a great leader. I've worked under you, and I know the results that you can produce for any organization that hires you. But I'm talking more about the individual contributor who is an all-star. They bring up to a leadership level, and it doesn't work out. It doesn't translate. Talk about that translation from an individual contributing all-star salesperson to a leadership level.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I say this, one of the things I sort of hang my hat on in my career is, if you're one of my people, right? If you're one of my employees, one of my sales team members, and you're you have the desire to be a leader at some point, I will do my best. And I've always sort of made this as a promise. I will do my best to give you all the tools and help you check all the boxes you can to make that, next step towards leadership. But you're right. There are people that are fantastic salespeople that check all the boxes of being an amazing seller, but then they think, okay, because they're so good at this, because they sort of check all the boxes when it comes to individual contributorship and what they're doing, they're going to make a fantastic leader. More often than not, that's not the case, right? Because being a great salesperson involves a lot of different skill sets, a lot of different competencies than it does to be a leader, right? To be a great salesperson, you have to be aggressive, right? You got to be tenacious. You sort of got to take no shit from anybody. There's certain characteristics that great salespeople have that don't translate, and usually are quite the opposite, the antithesis of being a good leader, right? To be a good leader, you have to be patient, you have to be understanding. You have to make sure that you're not putting your competencies on this individual contributor and saying like, well, I'm expecting to be a mini clone of me. Because again, that's never going to happen, right? Same thing like when you're raising kids. Like you can't expect them to be a clone of you. They're not. They're a completely different person. So what I always say is being a great salesperson can often help you in the leadership role, but it's not the end all be all. And I notice a lot of companies, I don't think it's because, and again, I'll say it, this is a hot take, right? I don't know if it's specifically because they think they're going to be an amazing leader. What I think it's because they know the market out there is extremely high for very talented sales leaders, right? And so if you were to bring in a sales leader from the outside, most definitely they're going to be asking for a higher compensation package than you would if you just took a outstanding salesperson from the inside and promoted them. Not only are they getting that person a discount, they sort of know how, they know the X's and O's of how the organization runs, and most of the time, and I'll just say it, we know that the best individual contributors, they cost a lot of money. The majority of the individual contributors that are in that top 10% make way more than the middle managers and the VPs, that you and I are working with, or doing as. So they're actually giving themselves sort of a pay cut by taking that, high producing individual contributor and moving them into that management role. They're actually getting a cut. They're actually getting a break on, their overall, their overhead. And then they're also saving the amount of money that they're going to have to pay, like, quote unquote, myself, someone like me who's coming in as an experienced sales leader that's going to ask for a compensation package that looks like X and they're only willing to pay Y. So, I mean, I think that's something that's probably not said enough, that, they're willing to sort of take a less experienced leader in the name of, oh, well, we're promoting from within because we really think he's or she's the next, great leader. A lot of times I think it has to do with, like, you know what, they sort of know the business. Yeah, they're not a great leader, or they're not going to be a great leader, but they're going to save us a lot of money, and they'll do enough to where it's not going to affect us that much to where we have to bring in somebody else. So,
cross our fingers, hope it works. If it works, everyone benefits, except the individual contributor takes a pay cut himself or herself. Most of the time. How many times have you seen that, where you see a guy coming back out of leadership into an AE, senior AE role or whatever, and because of the money? I made way more money as an individual contributor than in leadership.
Yeah, I used to never see it. I used to never see it because they were very picky, even from internal perspective, of bringing somebody up to leadership. We used to have something, even at Teletrack, we had something, I think it was when Danaher took over. We had something do you remember this was like the Foursquare of like the sort of leadership pillars that they were expecting the next leader to have. And you would identify people on your team that sort of possess these 4 characteristics of leadership. And you'd find out like where they were on the graph as far as, patience was one of them, right? Their patience, their ability to sort of, deliver, bad news, good news. We had something called crucial conversations. We had to consistently learn and grow as leaders on how to sort of deal with our team in this ever evolving world of being over HR'd, I should say, is the craziest thing. We can talk more about this later on. It's like everybody thinks that HR is their protector and their friend. They absolutely are not, right? We know that for a fact, that HR is there for the benefit of the company, not the benefit of the employee, most of the time. That's that's the role. There are some exceptions to that, I'm sure. But most of the time, HR is going to do what HR does, protect the company, not you as an individual, right? It's the funniest thing is like when you sort of get into this situation where you have sort of a difficult conversation with one of your direct reports. And the first thing I say was, well, I'm uncomfortable. I'm going to go to HR with this for like, they don't like the new comp plan, or they don't like, and again, we're all, this is just information we're delivering to them. We don't own the company. We're not, sitting on the board of directors as middle managers or even vice presidents. We're given stuff and it rolls downhill, and we present this to the sales team. They many times are not very happy. Oh, I'm going to go to HR with this. And as a leader, you have to just sort of chuckle and go, okay, but why? And, do you think that's going to be yes, I'm going to go to HR. This isn't what you're doing isn't legal. It's like, I assure you it's legal. I assure you it is. You may not like it. And I used to have those, and again, I think probably what separates me is we always throw this around, the player coach mentality, right? It's because I was an account executive for so long, and because I sort of understand, I sort of just, I try not to be a dick. Like, that's the thing, is like, don't be an asshole, right? Like when you're a leader.
How's that working for you, Mike?
Not always good. Yeah, I think a lot of times the companies do want assholes, right? They do want guys that just sort of lockstep, into what they're saying and not sort of deliver the information in a certain way. But I think, look, if you talk to, I think most of my account executives, I talk to a lot of them to this day, even ones I've had, unfortunately, to performance out. I still talk to them because they get it and they understand. But you say it in a way where you're just not an asshole about it. This is somebody's livelihood. So you just got to make sure that you're sort of delivering the information in a way where they're not stupid. These people aren't morons. You say, listen, I understand you're not going to like it, but let's figure out a way to where we can make this work for us. And if we can't, then let's figure out a way to, update your resume and, update your LinkedIn and, get you to go somewhere else where you're going to be happy. Life's too short for you to stick around here and not be happy, period, end of story. Right? So I think that's important.
Yeah, I think like when you're coming from a place of empathy, caring, I think that, you've always really cared about your AEs, and that's always really shown. So, I think you've never really had too big a problem with that. You have a good heart and the way you lead, and it's very much appreciated with the people that work for you, so.
Thank you, buddy.
Now,
I appreciate saying that.
Talk about also in leadership. This is something that I like to talk about as well, is sales training and development from a leadership perspective, and how do you think that always translates as well? Because a lot of times what you see is, our director does the sales training. He came from product and now he's in sales director, and now he's training people to sell. Or we've had the AE guy who, move up into leadership, and now he's training his 12 guys in the Midwest to sell. Right? Can you talk a little about how that translates as well in some of the success or some of the failures you've seen around sales training in that environment?
Yeah, and this is not a plug for you, although I would happily give you one because I think you're a very gifted trainer when it comes to that kind of perspective. But the best training I've had has always been from the outside. Inside's great, it's always good, but there always feels like there's this underlying agenda, right? And I think that's again, maybe it's that they feel that, salespeople aren't that smart or something. I'm not sure what it is. But when you bring in somebody from the inside, that's sort of pitching them on a way to sell either a specific product or a specific way or in a specific methodology, it always rounds about. Also, I'll give it to you this way. We learned spin at Teletrack, right? And it's, again, spin is one of those, methodologies out there, just like the MedPick and just like the Challenger sale. They're all sort of very similar. They all have a nucleus of, just sort of taking care of the customer and being more of a consultant, as opposed to some guy like a carnival barker just trying to sell a product, right? Every time that this methodology has sort of been brought to us by sort of an internal trainer, there was sort of this underlying, yes, but it has more to do with the company and what the company's pushing you to. Whenever, and Pacific Bell was great for this, they'd always bring in external trainers. Like Dick Knox taught us on DISC, the personality profile training, which was fantastic. They trained the employees without an agenda. They trained the employees on the methodology and the sort of whatever they were training and whatever their core competency was, without any sort of underlying agenda about the company. It was just basic, like, hey, this is going to be transferable to whatever company you go to, whatever sales job you have, even whatever job you have, this is going to transfer over because there's no underlying agenda from the company on that training. So I think it's great to bring in people like yourself, outside training agencies, to sort of say, listen, screw the underlying agenda from what the company has. We'll do that. The managers are going to do that. The leadership's going to take care of that side of it. But as far as the training on the methodology goes, come in with a clean perspective on the actual methodology. We want them to be experts on the methodology and the methodology alone. So I think that's one of the most important things I've seen over my last 20 years. And again, you sort of have to, is this their full-time job? Or were they sort of like pigeonholed to sort of do this? Like, hey, they're going to train us on, this person's going to train us on MedPick. Okay, who are they? Well, they were the product manager. Okay, so what's their experience with MedPick? Oh, they went to a class, they went to a seminar 2 months ago, and they were there for 2 weeks. It's like, oh, they're going to train us in the MedPick. Have they ever used the MedPick methodology? No, they haven't. But they took a seminar on it. It's okay. Is this going to really help? Like, is this, or do we want someone who's actually an actual trainer that has been for 15 years or 20 years and has actually used the MedPick methodology at some point, been successful at it, can tell you why it wasn't successful in these certain areas? I mean, that's sort of the difference, I think, versus external versus internal, in my experience anyway. Again, this is just 100% my experience.
Yeah, MedPick, processes like that, I would call that more of a process, right? And you're being trained on more of a process when you're talking about a MedPick solution. And I think a lot of times that really can open up the door, and there's a thin line where micromanagement can be kind of an overbearing part of your sales process and opportunity management when you're using I'm not against MedPick, but I think you have to use it very smart, and you have to really walk that thin line between being overbearing on your AEs and controlling their deals. You have to allow your AEs to control their own deals and be the quarterback of their own process. And so sometimes I think that, well, I mean, as a manager, you might not see it that way, right?
I do. No, I see what you're saying. Here's what I'll say as a leader, right? And here's why. At the end of the day, we're all soldiers, right? We work for the company that employs us. And so I'll say is absolutely the reps need to be the quarterbacks of their deal. But what happens when the rep isn't the quarterback of their deal? It's not just as simple as right. Okay, so right. The expectations they're going to
train for expectations, not for the failures, really.
But what you also want is you want something. Here's my pushback on what you're saying is just in the methodology perspective. Is my job as a leader, whether it be VP, director, whatever, running a sales team, is not only to make sure their pipelines are up to date, make sure that they have a significant amount of ARR in their deals, that they're selling the product the way we want to sell it. We want to make sure as a leader of a team or the region that we're given that your success is repeatable, right, and it's standardized, right? Because what you don't want is to have sort of 6 different reps with 6 different methodologies, and they're successful. One successful because he's doing this, one successful because she's doing that, and then that person leaves. And now the success is not repeatable because they were doing something very, very specific to their region or that. So I'm totally fine with sort of pushing back and saying, well, yeah, methodology is more of a process and goes to micromanaging. And I'm not a fan of micromanaging, but I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, are getting just good old fashioned management mixed up with micromanagement. Right. And I think management there's nothing wrong with going to your rep and saying, hey, listen, it's what's going on with the pipeline. The pipeline's really, the top of funnel is looking really lean. What's going on? I'm getting a little concerned. Oh, stop micromanaging me. I'll get it taken care of. Like, no, that's not micromanagement. That's just management. That's just you managing your pipeline. If you're doing it in a good job, you're managing your top funnel. If you're putting in a consistent amount of deals on a consistent basis, we're going to have we're going to have a much better conversation about like how we can get these closed, as opposed to more of KPI led discussions of, well, how come you don't have X amount of deals in your pipeline, right? So,
well, and micromanagement is not always bad either. I would say that, right? Some people require it, especially when people are not following the correct procedures. So that's my pushback on that is we have to train for passion to close and sell and perform at a high level, right? And part of that is following that process. So there's a disconnect if your reps are not following the process and they're failing, because you will fail when you don't follow that process. Whatever that your company is using, MedPick, whatever you want, you're not following that process. And I would also say that like a challenge or our modules, ISP or Spin, Gap, whatever you're using, is a methodology versus that could fit into the process of a MedPick, right? And so
right, yeah.
as you're going and training the methodology from a place of discipline, consistency, the process has to be a part of that discipline and consistency for success based on X number for your quota. and if they're not doing that, there's a disconnect. And a lot of times, and a lot of the boomers are getting gone, right? And you saw that a lot. I'm old school. I don't use technology. I don't know how to email. I mean, I remember that actually. I don't,
I spoke about that on, I think, a different podcast. Like I had a story about one of my sales leaders that didn't know how to use email. All he knew how to do was essentially forward them. So he would forward them to me, and I'd have to open his attachments and sort of read out what the attachments were. It was crazy. So yeah.
Oh my God.
It was
the weakest excuse for anyone this day and age is I'm not tech savvy. I mean, when I hear that, I want to punch you in the face. I'm not tech savvy. Well, you better be. You better be. Anybody better tech savvy, or at least have, a modicum of understanding of the basics. And if not, go get an AI engine and learn about it. Whatever you got to do, if you're in sales, you better be on the cutting edge of all of this.
Well, it's so user friendly nowadays. There's really not an excuse to be sort of tech savvy. My dad, who is 81 years old, he's got an iPhone and he can, sort of DoorDash with his iPhone. And this is a guy that has never had a cell phone in his life. So the technology nowadays is so intuitive and so smart and so easy to use that you really can't argue with someone that says, well, I'm not tech savvy. It's like, I understand if you don't know how to develop back-end API integrations, I understand if you don't know how to code. But using a computer or using the CRMs that are available now, like a SalesLoft or a Salesforce, that's just not an excuse anymore. And I will say, even on the micromanagement point, just kind of rounding back to that, listen, I'm sure it works in more like transactional, sort of low-level SMB type sales. You may have to do that because these people are just starting out or they're just getting out of college and they sort of haven't had that sort of kick in the ass to be able to sort of do the pipelining and the sort of KPIs that they're normally doing. At an enterprise level, my deal is if I have to micromanage you, I'm going to micromanage your ass out, dude. Like that may sound harsh, but again, to your point, I've always been upfront with my account executives and said, listen, I do not have the time to micromanage you. I have my own stuff that I have to be responsible for. Okay. I know people sort of, there's a great article that I was sent, I think it was in the Atlantic, about 2024 was the great unbossing, right, of 2024. We had the great resignation, and now 2024 we have something called the great unbossing, which maybe, I don't know, perhaps that's something that, draws a line as to why there's so many director and VP level people available in the market right now. And what they're saying is like, well, hey, listen, we can just sort of take the account executives and have them report straight to you like a senior VP, or in some levels craziness, this report directly to the CRO, which if you've ever been a VP or director, sort of that mid-level management in sales, that's insane. It's just insane to think about that, because not only were we sort of the glue that held the sort of sales organization together as a whole, and I'm not, patting myself on the back too hard, but there was always a sort of like, the middle managers, they don't really do anything. Like we did fucking everything, dude. Everything that wasn't done by the account executive or done by the VPs at that level were sort of like Caesars, right? It was like, yes, that's a good idea. No, that's a bad idea. As far as like putting together playbooks, putting together strategy, inspecting top of funnel, inspecting the forecast for the week, all the stuff that they would, sort of would roll back up and they'd submit to the board of directors, that was all done by us. All the data being pushed up, all the Salesforce reports, all that stuff was being created, done by us. If you eliminate that level, sorry, go ahead.
No, I always said someone's got to run the Einstein reports.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like the fact that like they think like, oh, you know what, we can make our stock jump up a quarter of a point if we eliminate this layer of leadership and just have the account executives go straight to the. My God, you want to talk about a disaster waiting to happen? And I'm sure, by the way, I'm sure that's going to go away after this year. I think it's probably a temporary type of deal. But I think again, I've always been.
You think MedPick was bad earlier? Wait till you see it now.
Yeah, wait till you have to have a CRO deliver a symposium on how to do a MedPick demonstration.
This thing's at 95%. There's no notes. What happened?
That's right. We haven't spoken to them in 3 years. Yeah, that happens more often than you think. I mean, I'm sure as you see it, it's insane.
I've been on both sides of it. I did it, and I saw it.
Yeah. And I would say, to my account executives, I'd be very upfront with them. And it sounds harsh, like, oh, if I have to micromanage you, I'll micromanage you out. It's like, I would say it in the terms of like, hey, listen, you're in the big leagues now. Like I have my own list of responsibilities that I have to do. Part of that is managing you and managing your pipeline, making sure that we have a consistent amount of AR coming in from month to month. At the same time, like I shouldn't have to go into your specific deal and find out why you haven't updated the notes in 4 months. That's ridiculous. Like that's something that as a seller at your level should do, like getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth. There shouldn't even be a question about keeping good notes and history. And again, what I always say to my account executives, like, listen, you're paid a base salary. You all aren't car salesmen. You're not paid 100% commission.
Nothing
that
wrong
base
with car salesman.
Nothing wrong. They're the absolutely. It's great if you can do
society.
it. I wouldn't go that far. I would say that they're skilled though. I mean, to do that, that's sort of like eating what you kill. That's an amazing mentality to do that. What I would say is these companies that, especially now, like in the enterprise level, who get paid, a pretty decent base salary, right? You're paid that base salary to be a good steward of the data, to be a good steward of the information, to make sure that, hey, if you leave the company at some point, someone can take in there, go into your pipeline and have a clear picture of what they're going to sell for the next, quarter, 2 quarters. If you're getting paid, I don't know, $150,000 a year to be an enterprise account executive, and you're like, no, I'm going to keep all this stuff on a notepad outside the computer. you're a liability, right? Because if some point you leave, all that data leaves with you, right? You should be 100% commission salesperson if that's your mentality. But you get paid that base salary to be a good steward and to lead that conversation moving forward and be able to have somebody come in and take it over if they ever have to. So
well, and what I've seen too is sales training can be a gap to take place instead of micromanaging. I'm just from an outside perspective coming into corporations and training their salespeople. I had a guy a couple weeks ago say, "Well, my boss just told me what you're telling me last week," and it was literally just process-oriented Salesforce minutia that we were talking about, right? Update at specific, like just disciplined and consistent work. And I said, well, that's why I'm here. You don't want to be hearing this from your manager. They're giving you an olive branch, okay? And we can talk about this, and then you can go execute this and be a superstar. If your boss is telling you this, it's not a good thing.
No.
Right? So this is where sales training can come in and cover that gap that really can create a really toxic work environment, And these are sales points, sales training people are using, sales companies that we go up against, they use. This is how we get into companies and train their people, as we're talking about this type of value that we bring. And I'm not just trying to pitch the ISP group or anything, but I think, when we're going in, these are some of the reasons corporations are using sales training. We can speak in a way that a lot of companies can't speak to their own people, for one. And then we can also drive home really niche specific kind of methodologies and bring consistency to their sales process,
right,
without that overbearing management style that can create. And I get it. You're looking at it from a management perspective. To sales teams, a lot of times the management seems really overbearing. That's just the overall perception sometimes, even though it's not reality. That's just how it feels when you're making 150 a year. I can take it, right? If I'm making a base of 150, which I was in logistics and supply chain, 150 was my salary, and at that point, I'm not making any mistakes in my OTEs 400,
that's right.
That should be about it, so.
Well, and I think there's I think it's good, again, for a company like ISP that can come in as a third party. I think it adds a level of separation too between the company and the third party. I think that adds a level of legitimacy to what you're doing. If the guy that they knew or the girl that they knew who is like some product manager or a solution engineer that's training them on a sales methodology, it sort of loses a little bit of luster, right? Because they're like, they're just doing this as sort of a side gig, and they put themselves on mute and go watch TV while they're training, right? Versus they bring in an outside consulting firm. And this is why it's so important. They bring in an outside sales training firm like ISP to come in and say, hey, look, this is going to be a dedicated training based on this methodology, and it's going to take place from here to here. I think it adds like, oh, this is kind of like an event. That's huge. And that's how I looked at it when we did it, at AT&T. It was like, okay, we were actually taken out of the field for X amount of time to do this training. And again, it's whenever I think about sales training, I don't really remember anything that was done internally from a, like even back at Teletrack or AT&T internal training point of view. I remember the ones that they brought in from the outside. I remember the ones that were specific that came in from Spin. I mean, we had representatives come in from Huthwaite that represented Spin and taught us specifically on Spin selling. I remember that. To this day, I can still go through the methodology. I still have all my training books. That's different, from, just like, hey, this guy's taking his lunch break and he's going to show us on this methodology. I think it adds legitimacy when you bring in an outside agency to do that stuff.
And what kind of value do you see from that, right? Personally, like I did Spin. I know Spin well.
Yeah.
Situation, problem, implication, needs assessment. Isn't that it? Needs analysis, right?
Needs analysis, yeah. Yep. Situation, problem, implication, yeah. Yeah.
And I love Spin. That was the old school. I look at it as old school. Sales training is ever evolving, right? But that's a good kind of foundational, sales training that stuck with me for a long time and still stays with me.
Spin is I don't care what you say. Spin is at the core of every other sales methodology, whether it be Challenger Sale, whether it be MedPick. They call it something different, but at the core.
Mentioning my competitors.
Sorry. Well,
I'm kidding.
We'll call it something different, but I'm sure you.
Competitors.
There you go. Exactly. That's the way you should do it. It's still salesman at heart, Pat. No, I think, it's a good methodology for life, right? Looking at a problem, looking at a situation, looking at the problem, the implication, and the needs analysis. I mean, not everything. And I used to say this to my wife, she was in the police academy for a little bit. She was going to be a cop, and she went down a different road, which I'm thankful for, because, man, I think, police officers are just underappreciated in our society nowadays. So dangerous. But what I said was, I was talking to her about, I think, this personality profile training I took. And she goes, yeah, but this is being a police officer, not sales. I'm like, no. Everything is sales. Everything is sales. When you distill something down to its most pure, that is sales. If you're a police officer and you're trying to get a person to get out of their vehicle without a confrontation, you're selling them. You're selling us to, like, hey, listen, get out of the vehicle, peacefully, so we don't have to put the handcuffs on, so we don't have to pull you out of the. I mean, that's a sale that's taking place between you and this person. Right. It may not seem like it's a sale, but it is. And, I don't care whether you're at, again, you're at a Starbucks or you're something. A sale is taking place in the majority of the interactions we have together on a day-to-day basis. And I've found that a lot of the trainings that I took in my life helped me personally with interactions or, discussions I had with my kids about things, or very, tough, just like tough interactions you have with your employees, even not, talking from like a seller prospect type, but just a conversation you're having about, their pipeline review, whatever. That's a sale, right? Me and the account executive are going through a sales transaction right now. I'm trying to sell them on why they need to update their pipeline, more effectively. They're trying to sell me as to why it's a waste of time. That's a sale. That's a transaction. And so again, at the core, I think a lot of these methodologies just help, in life. So I think it's great for anybody who's even not in sales to sort of get to be an expert in one of these methodologies. I think
the key word is help.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's what sales is. I think a lot of verticals, tech a little less probably. I think, sales has a bad stigma. It's a dirty word in a lot of industries. And we train a real estate firm in Michigan. And when I went in there, they said, oh, we don't have salespeople. We have agents. And I said, well, explain that. So you're not selling anything? Right. So we talked about sales and what it really means from a very fundamental level. And we had to reframe what sales meant to that organization and turn it from being this dirty word, because they don't want to be associated with used car salesmen. And you know what? My dad was a used car salesman his whole life.
Was he in that Kurt Russell movie? It's a fantastic. It doesn't age well, but
he sold 1-year-old Lamborghinis, but no, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm totally.
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. It has become a dirty word, and people try and church it up, like to call themselves, sales consultants or sales, whatever. They're trying to remove sales of just a solutions consultant, whatever they want to call themselves. There's nothing wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, people do want to be sold. They say they don't, but they absolutely do. There's a reason why this profession continues to be extremely, well paid. And there's not that many people. Anybody could do sales. Yeah, bullshit. Yeah, bullshit. I mean, sales is not easy. For one, you have to have a personality, right? There's a lot of people that you've met, that are maybe they go more towards the engineering route that don't have the sort of gregarious personality that's sometimes required to do this sort of profession. But also, again, I'll take this back to Circuit City. I remember in Southern California when Best Buy came on site. Best Buy came on site and they were the new kid in town. And everybody loved Best Buy because Best Buy had great prices. But you know what Best Buy didn't have? They didn't have any salespeople. They had 19-year-old kids. They'd put a blue polo, and they would know the very base minimum amount about anything you're trying to buy. You're trying to buy a dishwasher. You're trying to buy a TV, whatever. They knew that the TV would turn on, and here's the button. At Circuit City, right where I worked, you had textbooks. You had manuals on how to sell specific, brands. You would take specific training on specific brands and what separated a Hitachi from a Kenwood or whatever X amount this or Magnavox. Whatever it was. I sold car stereos, so I'd have to know the difference between Alpine and Kenwood and Pioneer and what the differences were and why this one's better than this one and where this one has advantages. So we would have customers, or they weren't customers because they weren't buying anything, but they would go they would go to Circuit City first, then they would have the sales consultant, the guys that we were, sell them on whatever they were looking to buy, and then they'd go buy it at Best Buy. So they obviously saw value in what we were doing. They saw a value in what we were providing them because we were telling them all about the different brands, the different products, the different stereos, the different, ohms and wattages and all this kind of different things that involve that stereo. And they'd go, great. They'd write all this stuff down and they'd go to Best Buy and save the money. So you can't tell me there's not a value in being sold a product. There absolutely is. This is why our profession still exists to this day, is a lot of times. Yeah. And by the way, prospects are smarter than they've ever been. They're absolutely smart because the information is out there. And a lot of times when you're jumping into these, demonstrations, they already know more about the product than maybe you do as a salesperson, or they know more about the industry than you do as a salesperson because maybe it's a new industry to you, whatever. At the end of the day, though, they're still looking for a validation from you on what they're buying. They still want you to present them with the ROI. They still want you to put together the deck and the presentation and present to them why they should go with your solution over another one. They don't want to have to do that much work. They have a good understanding as to why they need, let's say, a GPS system for their fleet, but they want to know what makes you better than their competitor. They want you to do that work. And that's still a job for us to do, to go out there and say, all right, great. Here's the boxes that we check. Here's the boxes the competitor checks. Here's why you should go up with us versus them. I mean,
and a lot of it has to do with coming to the table as an expert. Companies are looking for experts as a salesperson, right? So they have so much data at their fingertips from AI, from online, everywhere. And these guys are experts in their own field. Right. So we're talking with IT, product, whoever we're selling into, we might bring procurement in, all these different personas at an organization. And we have to be able to communicate with each person and connect people with our company, with their company at that level and relate to them and bring value to each relationship we build. And that's really what bringing value is. And, and who runs a company? A CEO, right? For the most part, most CEOs come from sales. They understand that the only way their company makes money is sales, period. So if I challenge CEOs on that all the time, you're not investing in your sales organization, your sales channel. How have you gone from doing sales yourself to the CEO of an organization and all of your funds right now are going into HR? It doesn't make
100%.
sense to me, right? And building these relationships in those complex ecosystems can be challenging, and it does take many different types of personalities. And I know you said it's a certain personality in sales, but as a relationship builder in sales, I think people, I'm not like the biggest relationship minded person in sales, right? But what I think in terms of building relationships is making connections between organizations. So if a lot of times this is what I used to do is I'd say, all right, well, I'm going to have my legal team on the call. It's our first meeting, right? I'm going to have my legal team. Is there any way you can have your legal team jump on just for an introduction? Why the hell would we bring our legal team on? Well, we want to make sure if we're exchanging any, confidential information that we want to get on top of signing NDAs potentially if we continue these conversations. Right. And I had a situation once where I did that. It worked perfect. There's been times it doesn't work. And, maybe I invite product instead, or IT, if we're talking wireless or whatever we're looking at, and I'll invite someone else onto that call. But I had a time where we had legal on this call They showed up. My legal team showed up. These guys hit it off so good. They went to a baseball game together. They brought all the legal teams. That closed the deal for me. I mean, that's what relationship building is. Doesn't mean I'm really cute and friendly and, you know, make all kinds of friends with everybody. It's I know how to connect people and build relationships B2B. And I think that's a really important piece of it. But also the fact that, you know, the only way companies make money most of the time is only revenue. You know,
show me one that does. I mean, it's all revenue, right? I mean, it's all that sales. Sales used to be. I think people are they sometimes tend to forget that like
unless
sales is a bad word.
Investing stuff going on in the background. Or
you know, I get. I don't know how much selling Apple does. They still spend quite a bit of money in marketing, but it's sort of a machine now where they probably don't spend a whole lot of money on sales, right? So it's sort of the iPhone sells itself, but they did at one point, right? I mean,
they have enterprise and strategic divisions, probably with hundreds of salespeople.
Sure, absolutely. No, they do, but I'm sure that's like, you know, but there's exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, yeah. I mean, sales used to be king. They were looked at as. I mean, we used to have this argument all the time. Is when we had Chairman's Club, you and I both, we'd get the Chairman's Club trips to Mexico, right? We'd always have the operations people would be so pissed off because they weren't going. You know, and it's like, hey, listen, then get into sales. You know, I'll hire you. You know, we'll train you how to sell, but. You know, if you want to go on the trip, you know, there's a reason why. It's because it's not easy to do. It's very difficult and it's very stressful. But I mean, the best adage I've ever had was, or the best line that I ever had was, and I use this to this day, is when you stop selling, you start selling. And it's so simplistic. It's so simple to say that, but I've literally lived that my entire career based on that. Is, listen, I'm not trying to sell you something. And by not trying to sell you something, I'm probably going to sell you something. Because I'm not worried about, at the end of the day, whether I'm getting paid or not. At the end of the day, I'm worried about whether I'm going to be having a productive conversation with you, whether I'm wasting your time or whether you're wasting my time. That, I think, more than anything, I haven't met enough salespeople that are willing to just bow out of a deal when they know there's no solution there.
Why do you think that's so much customer churn? Right, that's the root of it right there. We're closing 100%. Deals with companies that don't align. We're not bringing value. We haven't done our due diligence through bringing expertise and doing good discovery and really digging up good pain and finding the challenges where we can be that niche solution for their entire organization. And then we close a deal and then it's done. And we don't look at any other avenues throughout that organization to expand into further offerings and bring more value to different departments, even in telematics. You know, there's so many different areas you can bring value to the organization. You know, and you remember Charles May?
Very well. Yep. Yeah.
He was always
he's still there.
He was always really good at doing that. He was always really good at landing and expanding, right? We talk about that. And so he would build out these full, you know, ecosystems of value for the customer through our product. He was really good at that.
Well, I think, again, this is, and I could put Thomas Ness in this, and I'll be loved if he's on here, but one of the best sales guys I've ever met. He doesn't sell the product, he sells himself. And I know that's so cliche to say when you're talking about sales. It's like, oh, I sell myself. And you're with this product, you're not getting me. That's why we're better than, you know, it's like that's sort of a cliche thing to say. But these guys who we're talking about, who are like at the peak of enterprise in our industry, right? They really do sell the relationship. They don't sell the specific product. I think if those dudes moved from one company to the next overnight, they would take probably 8% of the companies they sold with them. Right? Because at the end of the day,
on that, and I agree. But my only pushback on that is, you know, how many times, and I've seen this probably a dozen times in the last 20 years, right? Where they say, "You still there?" Or we drop out, or
no, I'm still here. Yep. I think you're freezing a little bit, but we're good. Yeah.
Mike, there?
I'm here. Can you hear me? Yep.
Still there?
I'm still here. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, probably like maybe 10, 12 times over the last 20 years, I've seen, Patrick, we really like you. We want to do business with you, but your product sucks. So it's at
least it's honest, you know, 100%.
It's not always the relationship, right? We can't.
Yeah, you can't sell garbage.
They can't just like us. The product has to solve a problem, right? And this is
Okay.
where we get a lot of, infighting with product and sales, right? I mean, that's every tech company's and marketing. Marketing, that's a whole other story, right?
Yeah,
But
well, the difference is those dudes probably wouldn't work at a company where the product was complete garbage, right? I mean, I think you got to be pretty choosy about the product you sell yourself, and I think we all do this. I've done it myself. I've turned down companies to go work at because I know it's like, ooh, this is going to be a lift to try and get this this company on the map. So, listen, I think the more skilled mercenaries in our league, the enterprise mercenary guys like the Thomas that Charles made, those guys can kind of choose where they go. They can kind of decide. And most of the time, they don't choose the easiest product to sell. They do choose like maybe a little bit more, because again, it's they're going to make a lot more money doing that. It's going to be a lot more complex. Yeah, 100%.
Terry's on right now. He said, "JM, sell me on AOBRD. Sell me this AOBRD."
This is 2017 as we're going backwards. I'd turn around on him and tell him to sell
onboard recording device.
AOBRD. That's AOBRD. It's what they used to back. It was before ELD came out. That's what we used to call an automatic onboard recording device. Yeah.
It's like that Jordan Belfort. Sell me this pen.
Sell me this pen. Yeah.
Sell me this AOBRD.
Sell me this AOBRD. And it's so funny we use that. And again, it's so funny about. And this is another process of interviewing, right? Which is interviewing is. It's tough. It's fun because you're talking to different people, love the relationships I'm building over these interviews. But it's also tough because you're so sort of ingrained in this industry that you start using all these acronyms. And people are like, what are you talking about? What's ELD, DOT? What are you talking about? And I'm just like, telematics, what is that? Yeah, exactly. They do love it. Well, that's another thing that Dick Knox training, which is so funny. I try not to use acronyms ever. He would charge $20. Anybody used any sort of acronym whatsoever, even if it was DISC training. DISC is an acronym. We'd have to say, dominant, influence, steady, confident. We'd have to say the whole thing out loud instead of the acronym. It was pretty funny. But to this day, yeah, that'd be a little bit hard. I'm fine saying spin, but no, he was a killer about that. Anyway.
No, that's good.
We should get Terry in here. We should get Terry on the call.
Oh my God, he won't, man.
No, he'd slime light us anyway. Yeah.
So talk about the interview process a little. I just it's been a while since I've done that, but talk about some of this these canned kind of questions. Are you getting a lot of this? Tell us a time when you failed, or are you getting a lot of that?
Not as much. I mean, here's the thing that sucks about interviewing in a down job market. They sort of have their pick of the litter right now when it comes to talent. This is definitely a buyer's market right now for companies, versus like 2021. Shit, we were having a hell of a time trying to find like really good, account executives and sellers and stuff. It was people were staying. And then we had the great stay and the great resignation. Now we have, this sort of somewhere in between. But I think if you look at LinkedIn, and I'm sure I'm not, speaking out of school here when I'm talking about, the market the way it's at. If you look on LinkedIn, you look for the jobs that I'm sort of going after. Every job has 600-700 applicants per job. And we're talking like, these are not, entry, these are like sort of, senior director, VP level type positions. And so for those type of jobs, you'd see, quite a few applicants, but to like some of these, I saw one the other was at 2,700 applicants. 2,700 applicants, 80% of them had MBAs. 50% of them had over 10 years of experience. So they really do have their pick of the litter. So, you do sometimes feel like you're yelling into, a really large hallway. Nobody's hearing
like a vacuum.
But it is. But I will say this. So they've gotten a lot more detailed with their interview process. It used to be, I say used to be, like, okay, 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you'd have 3 interviews, and you would know whether you got the job or not. You'd interview with the recruiter, you'd interview with the hiring manager, and then you'd usually interview with like maybe a VP or a director, and they would say, yep, thumbs up, thumbs down. I think it changed probably maybe post-COVID to where now, like, I'm in interview number 7 with one of these companies, and I'm not including the recruiter in that. So actually 8, right? So, and they do these like sort of 45 minutes with this person. They'll get like, a CFO involved. They'll get a product engineer involved, and you'll interview with like 10 people at the company, 10 separate interviews. And at the end of that, if it's a thumbs up, then you'll go to a panel interview, or you'll put together some type of presentation, or 30, 60, 90, which that's not abnormal for this level of leadership, right? Just put together 30, 60, 90. But it used to be that was pretty early on in the process. It used to be your 30, 60, 90 was like your third interview. So now, I mean, these processes are taking months. You know, it used to be like, hey, we need somebody in seat in the next 3 weeks, so we'll put together. Now it's like, no, we're looking for someone to start at the end of next quarter. So, and they can kind of do that, right? Because the market is set enough to where it's like they run the risk of losing that good candidate. At the same time, you know, for every great candidate out there, there's 10 more right behind them. So that's the one thing I think that's different than it was maybe even 3 years ago. Is these it's a lot longer process, a lot more detailed process. So being much pickier.
I agree. Yeah, I was kind of, when I was interviewing with Motive and I actually got that job, I think we were 7 interviews deep, you know, and, you know, I mean, and another company came along and, you know, snatched me right up because they knew.
That's ridiculous. And again, I trust me, that's not how my process was. I know it was the process for the team that you were interviewing with, and I think it was because it was between you and 2 other guys. But I think that's, quite frankly, I think that's ridiculous, especially for even if it's an enterprise account, even if it's an enterprise account executive level. I still think you can get all that stuff done with a maximum of like maybe 4 interviews, right, and including the recruiter. And so, listen, when you kind of know, especially at this level. You sort of look at the background, you look at the success, you make sure that you have a good feeling, but you can also overdo it, right? If you get to like interview number 7, I think at that point, you're trying to talk yourself out of the employee. You're trying to talk yourself out of that person rather than talk yourself into them.
And what are you going to learn? The employee's talking themselves out of you.
100%. And if the employee, if there's another company that comes along, again, listen, and look, if you don't, the one thing I'll say to the companies, the thousands upon millions that are listening right now, look at your Glassdoor. Look at your Glassdoor reviews, and now Glassdoor has a thing where they even can rate your interview process, right? Take a look at that stuff. I don't think a lot of companies are very self-aware when it comes to those type of things, but they should be, right? And I would say that when I was an interviewer, I was very upfront with the process. Whether it was my process or not, I would say, listen, this is how it's going to go. And here's what I'll do on my end. If you're good, I'll tell you, hey, you're moving forward. Here's the next step. And I'll try and get that next step in the next, 24 to 48 hours. And I would try and move it right along. But at the same time, if I didn't like them, if they gave me a real, if I was like, oh, this is going to be rough, I told them like immediately. I would tell the recruiter, hey, listen, not a good fit, but let's tell them today, not a good fit. So they can move on and get some closure and move on. I think nowadays what you're seeing a lot of times too is recruiters, they'll never talk to you again. Like you'll have 2 interviews.
They're ghosting you. Yeah.
They ghost you. But what's crazy is it's not ghosting you as like the recruiter spoke to you and they're like, oh, it's good or bad or whatever. You'll get to like the 3rd level of the interview. You'll talk to maybe a CRO. You'll talk to a VP. Send them the thank you letter. Do everything you do. And you'll never hear from anybody ever again. You'll send the arbitrary, hey, just following up on this, or has a decision been made? Nothing. And that seems insane. Because as a candidate, I will never interview that company ever again, regardless of how it will never happen. It's so unprofessional. And it's like their way of saying, hey, listen, your time to us is meaningless. We have 700 people just like you. That lasts in a market like this. It does not last. And that stuff gets around pretty quick, when it's not so great in the market. So that's what I'll say about the process now. But there have been companies that have been amazing. The companies I'm interviewing with right now have been fantastic. So I can't complain. I think I'm being very picky about where I land this time. I want to go to a company where, even if it's an individual contributor role, right? I mean, that's the one thing I've sort of opened myself up to is like, do I need to be a leader? I'd love to. I like that. But I'm also a pretty damn good sales guy at the end of the day, especially at the enterprise level when you're dealing with like multi-million-dollar potential deals that take like, 9 to 12 months to close. And a lot of the interview questions have been sort of the arbitrary, well, hey, listen, you've been a leader, VP level. Why would you want to go back and be an IC again, even at the enterprise level? And the first thing I'll say is, well, hey, it's a hell of a lot more money. I always made way more money as an IC than I did as a leader, always. And 2, I think every IC should have had some type of leadership, especially at that level. I think that makes me a hell of a lot better IC, individual contributor. The fact that I have sort of had to implement these KPIs and these sort of boxes to be checked when I was leader. And so now that I'm being an IC again, I sort of understand why these things need to be done, why these boxes need to be checked. So I think, and that's sort of been a sort of my static answer when they ask me that is like, listen, being a leader is just going to make me better as an IC, make me take the KPIs and sort of the metrics a lot more seriously than if I had been like we talked about earlier, right? Why don't some of these great salespeople, why doesn't it translate into leadership? It's because they don't really have any respect for the process or the KPIs. They do what makes them successful. They have no interest in bringing anybody else up along with them. As a matter of fact, they look at everybody else at the company as a competition, as a competitor. So they have zero interest in bringing other people along, right? I think that's one of my greatest characteristics is I always want to bring people along. When I get to a sales team, I always, and you know this, I would always try and target at least 2 or 3 people and say, hey, listen, what do you want to do here? There was obvious those people that they want to be salespeople, and like you got to respect that. Hey, I have no desire to be in leadership. I have no desire to do anything else. I want to be a sales guy. That's all I want to do. Great, perfect, love that, absolutely respect that. But for the people that do want to move up as a leader, you need to be a good steward as a leader, and you need to put the things in front of that person to make sure that they can expand and extend their career path. And I've done that at every job that I've been at. I've tried to do that every job I've been at. So
yeah. So as you're applying to some of these AE roles, individual contributor role, are you running across that? Why do you want to be an individual contributor now? Are you coming
every single one of them. Every single one of them has said, like, at some point in the conversation or another, hey, I'm looking at your resume. You've been a VP of North America. What are you doing interviewing for enterprise IC role? And for one, I'll say what we just talked about. I'll say, well, because right now I'm on the outside looking in, and every VP and sales director position has 900 candidates, right? So it's it's pretty difficult. And you and I both know this. It's very difficult to get into a company if you don't have some level of contact there internally anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So 3 of the companies I'm interviewing with right now, I have contacts there. I have very close contacts that are getting me through the door. And if you don't have that, I mean, good luck. You're going to have to go backwards, you know? And again, what I continue to say is, listen, I'm at a point in my career is I really don't give a shit about the title. I love leadership. I love being in leadership. But if it's been, 5 months now, if I'm not getting I was actually at a company called Logicsport for about a month, right? 3 weeks. The company effectively closed after my 3rd week of being there. And I was hired for director of sales for all of North America. Crazy. It was the craziest situation I've ever been in. It was started in May. It ended on like May, 25th, which is nuts.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like I got a call, a week into before I started saying the VP had just been let go. And I was like, oh, that's a bit of a red flag. But I started, put together forecast, met with my account executives. And then 3 weeks later, they're saying, hey, we're shutting down the company, and laid off like 80% of the people that were there. So that's tough, right? I mean, that's a crazy situation. Not only is it crazy, but you sort of have to get back in the mindset of job hunting again, right? I had been, sort of looking for a few months. I land a gig, and then the company closes. Now I'm back into job searching mode again. And that's a tough thing to sort of get yourself back in the mood for. So,
are you seeing a lot of recruiters reach out to you as well?
Now I am. I think back around like April, May, it was dead. And me and Terry talked about this quite a bit, because I talked to Terry probably 3 times a week. I think it's great to have people to sort of, that aren't just sort of like an echo chamber, that can tell you sort of the hard truths and say, hey, and Terry will say, hey man, you got to get out of that negative shit. Like I'd say, oh dude, there's nobody, there's no gigs right now. There's nobody hiring. And he'd say, hey, do you be careful with like talking like that? You'll go down this really negative path, and it's not good for anybody. And that's great to hear. I need people like that, right? And I've been that person for other people. And I'm sure I've been like that for Terry as well. So it's good to have people around you like that. But I would say that it's gotten a lot better. I think everything's sort of winding down. Election years are always weird when it comes to recruiting for some reason. I think people are very timid about like what the market's going to do. And people will say, oh, that's nonsense. That's not true. It's like, I've been in leadership long enough. I'm old enough to understand, like, every time there's an election year, there's a lot of uncertainty in the industries, right? So they don't know which way it's going to go. So I think they pull back a little bit. And so that affects recruiting. And so it's tough to be, again, at the same time, man, I cannot complain. I'm having a great time being out with my kids. I have all kinds of time, just sort of spend on myself, just doing a lot of things that, you normally wouldn't get an opportunity to do, which is a lot of fun as well. So.
Well, that brings us to our next topic. What do you do for fun? I know, like I said, I skateboard. You must be a surfer, right, from California?
Yeah. No.
Hey, Terry surf.
No, Terry does surf. He's pretty good, I heard. No, I mean, listen, I love going to the beach. I'm not a huge fan of swimming in the beaches out here. If anybody knows anything about California, the water's not super clean, I'll say. It's much better when you go to places like Mexico and Hawaii. The oceans are just amazing. I jump in as soon as I get them. The beaches in California, the water's cold. It's crowded. It's not super clean. So anyway, no, I'm not a surfer. I love to see the ocean. I love to go down there and just hang out, but not necessarily swimming. But I like to golf. I've been doing that a lot more, and golf is one of those games that, I've been playing it for 25 years, and it's one of those games you can play for 25 years and never get better at. So it's always fun to, keep doing that. I love going to spend time with my kids. Both my kids are in jiu-jitsu. Three of my boys are in jiu-jitsu. My daughter's much more of like a bookworm, which I love. She reads, I think 100 books a week, it seems like. But she's amazing. Love spending time with my wife, and I love, she's an SDR for a company. And so I love sort of being her sounding board as well, which is kind of fun. She'll always, a lot of times she'll say, what would you do in this situation? What would you do with this prospect? What would you say? So that's kind of fun. So I mean, listen, I've got a huge family, a very supportive family, a lot of hobbies. I love to go. I love getting on the shooting range once in a while, so that's always fun. So
awesome.
Yeah, man.
Literally.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
do you do any spiritual practices to say? Do you meditate? Go to church?
Definitely go to church every Sunday. We try and go to church every Sunday. I shouldn't say
Nice.
but yeah, we try. I think we do it more for, when we get to our age, it's great, right? Because the messages are always fantastic, and I think that's great for anybody. Even I'm a Christian, but I would tell people that if you're not a Christian, it's great to go to church just for the messages. The messages, just like that we talked about the sales methodology, right? A lot of times they are just great to hear and to give you sort of a positive message for your life. Take the religion out of it if you want, but I mean, they're great messages, and hopefully at some point you find, your religion, but I think they're a great positive reinforcement. Every time we go there, people say, it's get up early on Sunday. I have never gone to church and been like, man, I wish I would have done something else. Never has that ever happened. Every time I go to church, I'm like, oh man, I'm really glad I went today. That was a great message. I needed to hear that. That happens almost every week. And we have a great pastor. I mean, Pastor Adam's amazing, and it's cool. So, So I'm not as spiritual as I'd like to be, but I try to be better every day. That's all we can do, right? Wake up and try and be better every day.
All right, well, we're coming up on time here. Is there any last words you'd like to leave us with here today? Any words of wisdom? Any motivation? I didn't really tell you to prepare for that, but what do you got for us, Mike?
I would say, listen, and I have this conversation with my son, Logan, who's my oldest. He's 15. He's so inquisitive about, he loves watching these podcasts. I did a podcast with Brian Burns that you had set me up with. He loves learning about sort of my profession and what we do. He's a very entrepreneurial kid. I'm actually at a coffee shop that he wants to come and sort of work at, so he can sort of figure out how to run a coffee shop, because he wants to own his own coffee shop one day. I love that type of stuff. And I will say the best advice I've ever had is spend as much time with your kids as possible. It's the one thing, just like I was saying, going to church, it's the one thing you're never going to look back and regret. Man, no one's going to be in their deathbed and go, oh man, I spent too much time with my family. You know what I mean? But they're sure as hell going to sit on their deathbed and go, I spent way too much time, worrying about bullshit that didn't really affect anything. And I think that I learned that at the last company I was at. The last company was at Motive. And I don't have anything bad to say about Motive. It was a good company. I loved the people there. I loved working there. But I will say I spent way too much time worrying about stuff that absolutely had no... At the end of the day, I was released... one of the other very talented sales directors who had been there since the inception for 8 years, she was released, and it didn't have anything to do with anything. It had to do with, we were a name on a spreadsheet. We probably cost too much money in salary, and they had cheaper options. It didn't matter how many playbooks I put together. It didn't matter how many trainings I put together. It didn't, the 15-hour days that I was putting in to do, trainings for the team, or put together this playbook for that playbook, or take on, wake up at 2:00 in the morning to do this training, whatever. None of that mattered. At the end of the day, you were a name on a spreadsheet, and that was hard. It was a hard reality, because it was like we had smashed quota for the year. We had knocked it out of the park. There was nothing in your mind that would think, oh yeah, this is going to end quickly this next year. And so I'll say is, you have to sort of look at the next job I will look at very pragmatically and say, I need to do everything I can to make this team successful, but it's not going to be at the sacrifice of my family, or the time I spend with my family, or my mental health, right? So say you can still be an amazing sales leader. You can be an amazing account executive without sacrificing the time with your family or your mental. There's no reason to be working at 2:00 in the morning on some sort of sales project that no one's going to give a shit about in 2 months. I will say that straight out. And there's times when I would literally be up 2-3 o'clock in the morning stressing just about these little things that at the end of the day meant absolutely nothing. So
it sounds like my life now.
Yeah. Priorities. Put the priorities in order. At the end of that rant, I would just tell my kids and tell everybody listening is like, make sure your priorities in orders. It's God, family, work. Put that that's the order it should be in. So
Well, it's kind of good to get to a spot in life too where you don't take everything so personally.
yeah,
You
100%.
at the end of the day, your numbers on a sheet. There's nothing personal about it, and you just got to separate yourself and move on and stay consistent. Get back, be disciplined. Get back to what's important. God, family. What else did you say? Guns.
Work was the third one. God, family, golf, maybe golf. No, and again, yeah, I think you're 100% right. It was nothing personal. I hold no ill will towards any of them. I mean, I've been on the other end of it where I've had to release people for no good reason other than it's the name on a spreadsheet and it wasn't my decision, right? And I try and communicate that and say, listen, it has nothing to do with anything you've done or whatever. It's just sort of a business decision that needs to be made. And sort of you can't take that personally. And the more you stew on that type stuff or you're bitter about it, it's going to do nothing but hurt you and your chances of moving on. So,
and really nothing in life is personal. Whatever you have going on is none of my business. Even if it might impact me, it's not personal.
Yeah, and I always say this to my kids. I say, what other people think of you is none of your business.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Do not waste 1 second giving a shit about what other people think of you or what you do, your process, whatever. That's none of your business. Stay away from it.
Be you.
Yeah,
that's right.
100%.
Well, that about concludes our time. Thank you so much, Mike.
Pleasure,
really
man.
Appreciate being here. Yeah, let's do it again sometime soon, and we'll be in touch, man. I'll get some of this video chopped up and sent your way, and we'll go from there. And have a wonderful weekend ahead. Thanks again, everybody, for joining today. All one of you. That took your time away from the Olympic ceremony. All right, Jay.
I'm gonna go watch right now. Thanks, buddy. Have a great day. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Later, buddy. Bye.